Thanks for sitting down and doing this. I'm actually super pumped, especially from your comment of when I sent you over the topics and you're like, oof, this is a list.
Yeah, yeah, it is. But I was like, I like it because I've have listened to your guys' stuff before, like on and off. I try to like dabble in people's podcasts, and I've had the aspirations of doing one myself, but it's like kind of the letting perfection get in the way of something is my problem with that. So
Just let it rip, man.
yeah,
It's been super fun doing it, and I'm humbled that a guy like you would be listening to ours every once in a while. And I think just the I don't want to say the paralysis from overanalysis, but just I think my own you don't want to put out something that it's like you don't feel like is 100%, but I know it's going to help like newbie Johnny. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. Like you're going to forget more stuff than all these newer cyclists are going to learn in the first 3 years. I'm like, you know what? I just need to like get my ego out of the way and just post some things. And then it's been super fun having more coaches on and just kind of like, I just want to try and like bring people together because there's so many. It's amazing how everyone does it just a little bit different. It's like you
yeah.
hear the thread, but they do a little bit different that way. And it's like it's just been really cool. So um I know you
Well,
want
that's
to
the fun
spit.
stuff because even like your original coach, I think we raced mountain bikes together because I'm here in Colorado. So we grew up like, or not grew up, but like even though he's a transplant from Geneva out
Dude,
here, we raced mountain bikes together. And then I heard him on the podcast, and I was like, no way. But
that is amazing. Jason
yeah,
started everything. Yeah, we still keep in touch a little bit. Um, yeah, dude, it's so, oh man, you brought back a lot of memories. I like get chills. Jason helped me so much. Not only from like the athlete side, but he was the first person when I was like, hey man, I think I want to start getting into coaching. I had been coaching like CYO basketball at the time and then got into cycling. And then I was like, oh,
yeah,
well, I can't really do both. So maybe I'll try and help like other athletes around me. He's like, you should totally do it. And so he kind of helped me get things going and figure out, where do you start? Like, how do you start going from athlete to coach? And so, yeah, I still hit him up every once in a while for some mountain bike stuff. And yeah, solid resource. Shout out Jason.
yeah. It's always good. It's funny how so many people cross paths because even like whenever I go up and visit upstate New York, and as I dabbled more over towards like the Canandaigua Lake area, I was like, oh, I see Brendan's name all over these leaderboards, and then over even at like the Watkins Glen speed track where
Yeah.
one of
Oh
the
man, that
my
was a
wife's,
good one.
yeah, I was like, holy cow, they actually did a race on that because like her dad is big into Indy 5 and going to the like race tracks and stuff. So I was like, oh, cool. So
We went there, I think maybe 2 years, and I had no idea that those tracks were not, I thought it was gonna be an oval. So we get there and like I don't think we got to pre-ride the course or we did either way. I mean, it was like pitchy. And if you've been on a
mhm,
car there, it's nothing, it's not flat at all. That was a wild race. I actually think
yeah,
back to that. That's when I used to cross paths with Curtis White, but the cross guy who's like
yeah.
big on Team USA, obviously. I forget, I don't know how old he was. He was like a little kid, and everyone was like, oh man, this kid is gonna be like the next like big ripper, and he does cross and da 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 da. And so it's funny. I saw him at New York State Road Race 2 weekends ago. So yeah, I kind of did a little trip up north, and it was good to be back. But yeah, those KOMs won't be standing long. There's a lot of really fast people in Rochester and G Tour, and every week it's like, oh, this person takes that one. Nope, Hakan, I see you. Ryan Fletcher, I see you. Who else is? There's like 3 or 4 people. It's just like, oh, okay, here you go, just take them.
Yeah. Well, I
So,
didn't know there was such a good cycling scene up there.
oh,
Because I go up there and when I go up there, it's more just like go ride the Mennonite roads and chip seal and around the lakes and circumnavigate that stuff. And it's like adventure to me versus like go and hammer a race. But just to each their own, I guess. So
yeah, the scene up there, I mean, I guess I'm biased because it's the only one that I know, but the thing that's interesting is you go to city whatever XYZ, and there's all these different clubs that are a team. In there it's Genesee Valley Cycling Club, and then there's about 20 teams underneath the umbrella. So there's I want to say like 250 guys and girls that are all one club.
yeah,
So the camaraderie is insane. Like I remember the first training race I won was 4 guys go up the road, and one of the guys' teammates was this older guy. He's like, yo, you're supposed to be in that. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, go. And I was like, now? He's like, go now. And I like jumped across and beat his teammate. No, like they didn't care that they were on the same team. Like it was just like the community, like, you don't know what you're doing. Let me help you understand bike racing. And it is, I took for granted they have weeknight races every Tuesday. And then like, I think Cat 5s are on Thursday. And you don't realize how valuable it is to be able to go race 40 people every week until you move somewhere else. You're like, wait, I have to drive 4 hours to go race. So yeah, G Tour people, you have it made. I wanted to go to one this past time up there.
You were just up there in Rochester then, weren't you?
Yeah, I was riding way too much and just was like, I'm trying to get back into like race mode. And so when did the New York State Road Race at Capital Region, which was super hard but really fun. Great competition. Then went west to Watertown and did North Winds Gravel, which was a smaller event, their first year. I don't know if you know Corey Burns. He used to rip a ton of cross. I don't know if he mountain bikes. He was helping to put it on. So I heard about them. Like, oh, I'm going to go support that event. And it kind of chopped up the drive west. And then went to Rochester, was there for like 5 days with my parents. And then I was going to go straight back to North Carolina, but took the long way to Virginia and Maryland. They had a couple, like a circuit race and a crit. So
nice.
Yeah, so it was good. Just getting back into things, and yeah. So
cool.
Yeah. What's so you racing? So I got a lot of stuff from Landry. He knows you, and he was like raving about when he reached out to you for the article for the strength training. So what are you up to these days?
I'm still coaching full time.
Cool.
So that's what I do. Doing a lot of skill camps. Like this morning did mountain bike skill camps. I do some race course directing. So like we have the Pikes Peak Apex, our mountain bike stage race here in town, and I've been the course director. This is a 4th year. So helping set the courses and indicate like what we're doing year to year. And I'm actually kind of like dabbling in some like gravel event promotion stuff on the side too. I guess it's like, doing just about everything, because it's like I used to work with USAC when I first moved here as a collegiate high school director, and then like went overseas and coached a national road team for a year, got a yellow jersey for the team there. And then but I do more like just mountain biking and gravel stuff now, because like that's just everybody's jam, and that's my background with like mountain bike racing and stuff. So but yeah, I mean, I've got 2 young kids, so it's constantly kind of juggling work balance and that kind of stuff. Like I just got back from Colorado State mountain bike championships this weekend, and like kind of dabbled with the triple bypass, which if you've ever heard of it, it's like 3 big mountain passes from like Denver to Avon, Colorado. Okay. So it's just like a 5,000 participant Fondo, but it's huge. And so I went and had some help did part of that, did the expo, those kinds of things. So, and I even have like a little junior team that I founded this last year. So I'm like coaching kids every week doing that. So
I feel like I'm busy, and now I'm like, I'm not doing enough things. Holy crap, man. That's amazing. That is super motivating. Wow. Kudos to you. I actually want to put this, if you're cool with this first part on the podcast, I think I just want to like let it roll. But I think if you're cool with that, I think the first question though is juggling all of that. And how do you train, race, family? What's your North Star in keeping it? I don't know if the right word is balance. I've been reading this book, The Passion Paradox, where it's by Steve Magnus. He's also written like Peak Performance and Do Hard Things. And there's a third one that I can't remember. And then this Passion Paradox doesn't get as much like pump from people, but a buddy of mine, Craig, was like, you have to read this. And he's not into balance. He's like, you got to go all in if you want to achieve big things. This is a great thing. I think that obviously, I mean, this, a ton of people that are working 9 to 5s, they want to get better at cycling. They've got a family. They're in your shoes. They have 2 kids. They have a wife. They have a husband. They have whatever. How do you manage all that? And is there a totem pole? Or that's what actually, shout out to Frank at Fastcat. That was one of their first questions. What's your totem pole of life? Where does bike racing fit in? And I always love that calibrating question, because it's like, are you trying to go pro, or are you cool with just trying to like win the group ride on the weekends? Both are great goals.
Just being realistic, right?
Yeah. So what's your like,
I guess it's because like, to me, this is a job, but it's also a passion. And it always has been. Like I've taken personally, like I've been pretty successful, but I think it's just because I've got, a grit and work ethic to kind of like keep driving. Like I always say, like my wife's a better athlete than I am. She like gets better results off way less than I do. And only the difference is I just keep going back to the well and keep pulling buckets. So it's like, but for me, it's like, it's less about the training. Obviously I still compete, I still do that kind of stuff, but it's like the North Star has constantly changed. Like whenever I was coaching and doing a bunch of like pretty high level camps and that kind of stuff, it's like I was riding 20, 30 hours a week because it was part of the job, like doing US Pro Challenge, leading clients at Leadville, leading clients at Unbound and Dirty Kansas. And it's just like part of the gig. And so naturally the training is there, even though it may not always be like dictated by this is my stuff for the day. But it makes you appreciate it because all the people that, kind of see your success and they get that inspired. And that's always been kind of one of my coaching taglines is to be a little bit of a source of inspiration and lead by example. So for me, it's like, I don't always think of it as like trying to get my personal stuff in, but because of like knowing the ins and outs of like, physiology and how the body works, I can kind of slide it in here and there to make sure that I get what I need to, but by no means do I have a, my training peaks is more of just like, it catches the stuff. It doesn't plan anything. Like there's nothing going forward for my work. But it's like, luckily knowing what I know, I can kind of like string it together and know when to rest, know when to ride the waves and valleys and just kind of like pull it out. And that's kind of always been the joke. Cause even whenever I had the junior team that I ran pre-COVID, like I won a national championship and all the guys came out and like kids on the team and parents were like, we stalked you on Strava, all this stuff, and there was nothing leading on to say you were going for that. And I was like, because I wasn't. I just went on a family vacation, hung out with my brother and his kid. We rode double days every day before the event. And I just went out there and did the race because we happened to be in the same vicinity. And, like I didn't expect it. And that's why it probably happened because I had no pressure. It was just like, well, there it went. I got dropped actually from the lead group of 5 and rode my way back to win after the day. So
dude, that is amazing. I think that's a huge piece there of like not having that pressure, not having to be this like, oh, this is my A race. Like everything's leading up to this whole season is based around this ride. I remember when I was even trying to just upgrade when I was going to a race, I'm like, okay, there's 50 guys. I need to get at least third because I'll get 7 points. I got to came in 15th. Like, yep. But then when I would go to a harder race, I'm like, dude, these guys are so fast. I'm going to like hang on and like, maybe this will happen. And I would come in 4th. And it's like, dude, wait, how did I do better in this race than that? And that was the lesson of like, just let go of all that, yep. Go race. And I love that. I think that's, to not, there's a time to plan, but there's a time to just show up and go and like have fun and don't overthink it.
Yeah. And I don't know if that answers your question, because I think that question is like, what is the totem pole or that North Star? It's like, it's so hard because like, to me, it's like, even with having a family and wife, my wife says like, oh, this is so important to you. And I'm like, well, it's my job and it's my outlet, my passion. Like I have a very addictive personality and I'd much rather be doing this than other things I could probably have gotten into in my life. But it's also, it's not a competition. It's like, I feel like this makes me better in other areas of my life too, because it's like, I have this outlet and also I have this, I can share the passion, the inspiration and that kind of stuff. So it's evolved. So since having kids and, that kind of stuff, it went from like, hey, I put all the effort into it to now it actually is more of like, how can I keep what I've gained and manipulate the coaching philosophy a little bit, because I don't have endless amounts of time to do it personally. So like, going and riding with clients this morning, it's like, did I get my ride in? Like I probably should have done something easier, shorter, whatever it may be. But it's like, well, I went and did a 2-hour skills camp out in the 90-degree heat. So, but it's for them. And they, rode all the stuff that they never had and came away from it like well prepared for the upcoming event they're doing. So I'm like, all right, that's a success for me. So
there's always something positive to reap from the ride, even if it doesn't go as planned, I think. So when you're talking about the physiology and stuff, I know you're a strength and conditioning specialist. So when I looked at your about page, I was like, oh my God, this guy's won. Like I was actually more like, whoa, he's been in all these mega races. He has like tons of palmares. And I should know the answer to this. So did you learn a lot about more physiology for training and cycling from just your own personal study, or is that like a background in school, or where does that all come into play?
Yeah, so I ended up going to school for exercise science and
Mm,
physiology with a minor in nutrition.
okay.
And I would say like, it's the chicken or the egg kind of thing. Like I started in school with like kind of pre-med and even like engineering. But then once I started getting in, like I walked on to Lindsey Wilson College, which was one of the first few varsity cycling programs in the US. And it just so happened it was, in Kentucky in my home state. So happened to walk on, and to them at that time, it was like they were just looking for numbers and getting people in there to score collegiate points and whatever category to fill up. It was awesome. So I thought I was like, oh, I'm getting on this varsity thing. And the next thing I know, but it's like a sponge. Like I was there with a bunch of, back in the day, like Sobe Head Shock Pro mountain bikers and people that were like really talented. And so me being like who I am, I was like, all right, I'm just going to like soak up whatever I can. And so that's whenever my degree path kind of changed from like pre-med and biology, whenever like the school is so small, it's like a small private Christian university in Kentucky, that the biology professor had maternity leave. And so they didn't replace her unless, so like my semester got like derailed where they're like, oh yeah, your courses for these classes aren't going to happen. So I was like, So I ended up
It
going
is a
more of the,
sign.
yeah, so I ended up going like more of the physiology route and taking, like I transferred back to my home state university at Murray State. Started a cycling club there after being varsity for a couple years and actually getting scholarship at Lindsay. And it was like the transition of like I was getting my like expert to semi-pro back when semi-pro was a thing and mountain biking was huge. Maybe this is dating, my age, but but it was like, you still had to work your way up through the mountain bike ranks to get that like expert to semi-pro and semi-pro to pro. And because of like going through the physiology, anatomy, exercise science courses, and I could apply it firsthand, it was amazing because it all stuck. It was like not coursework to me. And I was behind because I transferred from a private school to a public school and lost a bunch of credits, but it was like, taking 21 hours a semester and trying to race pro. And it came easy. And I was working a job like 35 hours a week. And I was like, all right, it just happened. And so it all just sunk in because I was like, instead of thinking like, oh, I've got to learn this Krebs cycle or this
Mm.
thing for the purpose of taking a test, I was like, this is how it's working in me right now. And that's whenever I started doing like my first internship with coaching out of Durango my senior year there, and kind of like started applying it all. So it just stuck. It was easy for me at that point.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I'm yeah, definitely envious of that. That's one thing I love about Landry is he's just super hungry and like applying everything he's learned, but he's also doing it himself. He's in the trenches. And that's yeah, I wish I was a psych and theology major, was not cycling in college. I wish I was. I always love being around the like I was up in Rochester when I started the University of Rochester team because like collegiate was so early. I was like chomping to go race, and these guys are going out and like racing in the snow in New York, and they're going on to Philly. I'm like, damn, I want to be on like a collegiate team. I
Yeah.
was just like, everybody's like, get in the van, we're going on this road trip, and it just sounds so sick. Yeah, collegiate cycling sounds amazing. What's so I actually let's jump into so for people, obviously you didn't get to see the email. I sent over a lot of the topics that we usually jump into. And Daniel said, I find my coaching philosophy is more around some of those soft things mentioned versus just the data. Let's open that up. Because I'm a huge fan of
Yeah.
this. I'm a huge fan of these like soft skills. And sometimes I even preface a podcast like, okay, if you're here for Watts, this one is probably not for you. You might want to skip it. You know, there's just so much to bike racing besides Watts. And I don't want to knock things like Zwift or indoor training, but I know that is like the focus. And there's strategy and there's different things. But it's different than when you go and apply it and you're in a race and you're, especially for things like mountain biking. And I get a little taste of that with gravel, but like there's a
Yeah.
whole other world of finding the fastest line and, so soft skills, let's just open that up. What kind of, when you read through those, what were you thinking when you wrote that back to me?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think obviously we have to we don't have to have the data as a coach because there's so many of those other things, but it's helpful. But I find that there's so many people that are like wearing their FTP or their VO2 Max on their sleeve, and they're just like proud of this, but it's like, it goes deeper. Besides that, it's like, there's repeatability, there's mindset. Like you said, you're, a psych major. Like I find that, there's more importance in kind of like where that mind piece is, that mindset. It's like, even like the national championship example, I wrote like a little article series on my blog, and people still refer back to that, being like, that mindset piece lured me in and captured me, like because of like that piece of it, instead of it being like all about the watts. And of course, like, looking at it from a standpoint of like, I've written some stuff for Training Peaks of, my office here is shared with SRM power meters where they produce them. And it's like, I did some early testing in like 2009 with mountain bike power meters at Leadville and stuff like that. So you kind of have that stuff, but it's also like turning away from it of, what are the sensations, what are the feelings, what are the skills? Because like being a mountain biker, and even like I still try to like walk the walk and talk the talk. There's been events I've went to with other pros that I've coached and other, high level athletes, and I can see their numbers. I'm looking at them in WKO and I'm like, oh man, I prepped them well. They're going to smash my face in. And it's like, I end up coming out better on the other side than they do. And they're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, there's a little bit of the race background that is more than just the numbers. It's efficiency. It's like say going down and doing like Austin Rattler. I did it with 3 other clients and showed up and just wore baggy shorts and literally made the lead group of like 4 or 5 guys. And like they were like, how did you do that? All the guys are up there like in skin suits in this race and like hammering. And I was like, well, I hung on for dear life in the road sections and then rode away from them in the single track and let my heart rate drop. And they were like, that was so challenging. So it's all about like stringing that stuff together, and also having the mindset piece to say like, I've done the work, the hay's in the barn. Now it's time to just open it up and let it go. Because that's one thing is that so many people get tied up in is like, they want to cram for the test or cram for the event versus like talking them through the, talking them off the edge of like, you don't need to do more, or when you're winning the races is in the off season, not right now. It's like, basically like you can't do anything else. So it's a lot of these extra little pieces, because even like all the scare of say like AI and, that kind of stuff, some coaches feel threatened. And I'm like, great. If somebody AI could build my training and I could just do the coaching piece,
dude,
I'm great. So,
yes.
but not to say I don't like manipulating the training, but it's like, it's a piece of a necessary puzzle. But it's like, I think the coaching aspect is like the relationships and all that other stuff to get people's minds right.
I want to jump back to the mindset article, so don't let me forget about that. But just real quick on the AI piece, what I want is a blend of like, I want to say this, the trainer road where it scores you 1 through 10. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with how they score it. I have a lot of people that use trainer road, and so I get to see how that sort of falls out. Not to knock those guys, but that works for their platform. I want then mixed in a better version of optimized intervals from WKO5. And then I want to have, when we can put in like the 60 other variables of like what happened at work, what happened. And if we could take those, and I know Tim Cusick has alluded to this, like the smiley face and the 1 through 10 scoring, and they're going to try and integrate that. And then even if we had people like put the metrics in the morning, how motivated are you? And something like that down the road. And then have the AI tell me like, okay, what's the next 5 best workouts and why? Because it'll also know somehow the events coming up and the demands of the event. And there's like so many variables, but if we can somehow streamline that, that would be so amazing. That would, yeah. I'm looking, there's going to be a way at some point. I don't know how they're going to do it, but someone really smart is going to come up with this.
And I think sometimes less is more. I mean, the thing is, whenever they finally like I coach some of the support people since the inception of Training Peaks. So I've been using it since, I don't know, like 2006 or something, 2009, I don't know. But anyways, like I was constantly giving feedback of like, this is a good feature, working with athletes is something valuable. And when they did the little like emojis and stuff like that, I was like, this is great. Like, this is the subjective feedback, because still dating myself. It's like I have journals when, to download a device, you had to come back in, plug it in, download a file, get it there, even if that was possible. And then like I still have journals where it's like I wrote down like how I felt, the weather, strength training, what I ate that day, those kinds of things when I was living in Nashville and racing more on the road. And it was like, oh yeah, I can actually go back and see how bad I was taking care of myself. It's like, what a coach tells, pot calling the kettle black, like, oh, if you see these signs, that is a red flag, like you need rest or whatever. And it's like being young and dumb. I was like 20s, just plow through. But those kinds of things are a little bit different from that standpoint of like, it's more than the data, right? Like whenever you're like, if you talk to an athlete, you can gain in a few minutes of like, can you just repeat what you just said? Because literally like they answered their own question and they're looking for you to answer it differently. And it's like,
Yes.
well, you just told me you ate like crap, you felt like this, blah, blah, whatever. And you still are thinking about going out and training. No, just roll the punches. Like,
Dude, that is such a good point. I'm actually laughing over here because WKO, won't even I'm gonna make this a 30-second comment. So the MFTP is like down 20 watts, and of course I'm like, wait, what? Oh my god, Landry, I gotta go do like a 25-minute effort. So I come off of a couple good races this weekend. I was definitely still a little banged up, but I was motivated. When I put motivated in my metrics this morning, I'm like, you know what? He had me just Landry coaches me. I've got a race on Saturday, so just gonna go out and do a couple little tempo things. I'm like, I think I'm gonna go try and rip that 20, and I'm gonna go. I got to go over this climb anyways. And I was just too tired. I went in like 12 minutes, and I'm like, oh, this is not going good. And like the wheels fall off. And so I think the motivated metric, I like convinced myself that I was ready for it. I definitely wasn't. So that was I sabotaged myself. So Landry, when you see that, I apologize. I'll stick to the plan. But yeah,
see, and as a coach, you know what you should be doing, but still you culprit of the same thing we talk about with others. It's like you think you're better than that, or that you can persevere and push through it. And that's like one of the things that you noted in some of the like outline where I was like, whoa, we've got a year's worth of content. Let's roll.
Yeah, dude. Well, we can rip these.
Yeah, but it's like the aspect of like you almost have to slow down and pull back to say like, what is this going to gain? What's the return on investment? And one thing I've kind of learned is the coaching, and I call it with like what I talk with my athletes is like riding the waves. There's going to be some peaks, there's going to be some valleys, whether that's a peak in intensity, a peak in duration for a single acute day versus a block of training. But you have to push, and it's, you push, but then you have to make sure that you soak that in too. Because that's the one thing that people want to do is they want to push, and then they see something like that, especially a lot of the self-coached athletes are the ones that are listening to your podcast or trying to gain information for themselves and learn. And I respect that. But it's also they're not objective enough. And that's where the coaches like you and I come in and say like, this is objective. This is how you're telling me you feel. So let's make sure to soak it in.
I think it's extremely hard. I've tried self-coach. That was the second time I self-coached, and I'm actually going to put out a podcast about why I did that. So we won't get into it here, but I have been able to stick to a plan for a couple months. That's usually like the falling off of the last person that coached me, and I just different personal reasons. Like, I just have too many things. I'm going to try and just do this myself and keep it going. And I revert to my defaults: ride threshold, or just do mega rides. And I like rode myself into the ground and then decided I was like, I'm going to race this year. And I went to amateur nationals, got my doors blown off as I deserved. And so it's funny. So then I was talking to Landry and we're like, okay, need to do some more high intensity. I'm just not ready to race yet. So had some good races. We focused on that. But then my brain is still like, oh, I need to go fix this vanity metric and do this 20-minute effort. It's like, dude, you're not ready for that. Your whole training before this was so you could go do crit circuit races, 3-hour road races. That's not a 20-30-minute effort. And just as myself being an athlete, it's like, I want to have everything. I want to do it all. And
yeah,
that's why there's a really good book, Ryan Holiday. I think he's a very well-known author.
Yeah.
The book is called, and he talks about take away the subjectivity when you're giving advice to yourself. If you are talking to a friend, if you have a problem in your life and you just pretend that you're talking to your friend, we give way better advice than when we give advice to ourselves. And so I've thought about that in coaching too. And Cade Bickmore was on from Project Echelon. He laughed. He's like, dude, I tried self-coaching, and I mean, I coach people. I just can't do it. It just doesn't work out well. And
That's
I
what's
think,
funny. It's like I've always been my own, and that's like one of the unique things, because how I got into coaching was kind of trying to find a coach, because I was like, I decided to take a career path and get health benefits and all that stuff, instead of like, oh, I'm going to walk onto this kind of road team and maybe make it, maybe not make a salary. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to take a job and, push this to the side. And I've done that a couple of times, and it's like probably the best decision long term. But it's like, whenever it comes down to it, like everything I always talk to like new athletes I'm working with is like, you're your own worst critic as an athlete. And the thing is, like, you're always going to be more hard on yourself than you would be hard on somebody else. It's like you always give everybody else a little more grace, but like everybody else is like, oh yeah, just I've got to harden up, but everybody else can have a little more grace.
so how do you do that? So what's your tips for, this is good because there's a lot of self-coach athletes listening to this, not having a coach. How do you see the big picture? I think that's the biggest thing that I fail to do, is I've looked back at times when I've coached myself. I'm like, damn, I did like the same thing 3 weeks in a row. Like I would never do that. I would never give that to an athlete. What's your method of stepping away from yourself and seeing yourself as the athlete with like the guiding eyes of the coach mentality?
Yeah, and it's the same thing. I try to like I have like the heart of a teacher approach, kind of like the Dave Ramsey like budget stuff of trying to teach athletes, because I don't, I'm not on call all the time. We can't charge as much as we want coaching to like be a doctor. And so I try to give athletes the skills to say like, it's an if then scenario. Like if this happens today, then I should do this. And they've got a few directions they can take that. And so I try to give them that learning experience. But in that process, it's like knowing like sometimes you have to say, now's the time to push. You got to get through this. You can't be complacent and say like, all right, I'll just give it another day and give it another day and another day, because the next thing you know, it's like you're not doing it. So there's a happy balance of, or I guess not even a balance, because I don't really think like balance exists in kind of what we do almost, but it's like you have to say like, here's a time where I've got to acutely push, whether it be a day, a block, whatever it may be, but then also being okay with taking those subsequent blocks off. And even like say having a family and that stuff, it's like knowing like if I can string together like even work engagements where it's like I'm going to coach practice, but on the way to practice I'm going to do a couple of my own efforts and then do practice and then maybe get something in afterwards, that kind of stuff, and then string it together with some like, I did that with like coaching a Leadville camp where it's like I basically rode 4 big days in a row, but then went on vacation with my family, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to practice what I preach and just let hang out, play in the creek with the family, camp, do whatever, and then ease back into it. And doing that, it's like, oh wow, I just hit a new, threshold power that I hadn't seen in a few years, just by like just listening to the process and just letting it soak in. And so like I think the part of that athletes need to hear is like, as long as you're doing some of the work, whether it be if you can get it in consistently, know that that's good. But then sometimes people hear consistency is king. So then they just kind of ride that moderato too much, where it's like moderately good, but they never allow themselves to fully recover. So it's like sometimes it's like figure out unique coaching ways or their own ways to say like do some intensity and then bookend it with a big volume, or do something where it's like you need to take a break, because there's a difference between like staying fit, like because you can ride pretty consistently and stay fit versus really pushing yourself to new gains. And that's where it's like you got to get into that uncomfortable zone. Like I noticed like you always mention talking about books, and like one of the good ones is like, have you ever read like Seth Godin's The Dip?
The Dip? No, I don't even know if I've heard of that.
It's a short read. It's awesome. Like I wrote a little article on it, but basically it's kind of the concept of like when most things get hard, that's whenever people stop. They get in this dip, and then if you can persevere through it, that's when the results are on the other side. And that's one of the like most popular things that I've referenced that people refer back to. It's almost like, say, if you're doing a 5-minute VO2 effort, but you stop, 2 minutes in, you just basically did all the hard stuff without the benefit, right? And that's the perfect example of the dip. So it's like, I have people doing more extensive efforts and saying like, why are you worried about, wearing that 20-minute power on your sleeve? if you just drop it a few watts and extend it, you're going to be better off for
Mhm.
like, say, gravel racing or Leadville or these mountain bike events that people are doing. And there's times to do shorter stuff, but it's like, that's one of those examples of like, giving them the skills to kind of make the
I,
decision.
I love that. I love giving the skills. I think, and if any of my athletes are listening, or if you're, I try to tell people, hey, have a coaching buddy or have like a training buddy. So if you can't afford a coach, don't want to coach, have somebody that you can like chat with. I think the trying to put before they do the workout, why are you doing this? Because then when you know why you're doing something, you're more likely to go in that. I don't know if you're going in the dip, fighting the dip, whatever it is, you're going in. Because there are times when I do VO2 max,
You're more likely to get through the dip.
Go get through the dip. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Because I'll get through the dip. I'll literally say to myself, I'm like, dude, you're here for this. You were 30 minutes ago, like hyped to go attempt this workout. Now that it's hurting, this is what you came for. And just that, like, okay, let's go. And even if the watts fall off, like you're saying, I don't want to keep using myself as an example, but coming back into like trying to get into race shape. I mean, the first VO2 Max workout, I knew the numbers weren't going to be what my brain is like. Oh, but you used to do that. So I was like, okay, take this number down, just get through this session, get that little W. And so I think that's a really good point to make. And then, if you're out there and you're trying to get with somebody to have conversations about your training, like help each other with that. And a lot of that's like that motivation from each other and feed off each other's wins. And just, you get this snowball thing going, and you will, like Daniel's saying, you're going to come out and hit numbers that you don't even are thinking of are possible. And it takes time.
Sometimes it's not about hitting those hero numbers either. It's like, yeah, I was lucky, but that came from doing all this stuff of months ago, because I remember the same thing. It's like, I have a performance studio that I've in my shared office here. And it's like, I remember going in there on one of the watt bikes and could barely hold numbers that were like tempo of last year. And like, I could hold them for hours. Like the power I held for 3.5 or a little over 3 hours for marathon nationals to win, like I couldn't even hold for 10 minutes, 12 minutes on the trainer. And I was like, what is going on? But it's like, it's about doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
So then you can add up, because I could have easily been like, screw this, I can't hit my numbers, I'm out. Instead, it was like, all right, go to the well, do what I can do for the duration that I know works, and then come back and do the repeats. And you get through that, instead of like, because your first question was like, what advice to give to these athletes? And it's kind of like two different tangents. One is acutely, sometimes you need to go dig deep. Like you need to do more than you think you can. But then conversely, sometimes you don't need to acutely go and empty the tank on every single session. Like you got to leave some in there. And it kind of depends on how you're outlining your training. Like if you have like, say, a consistency mindset where it's like, I can get a little in every day, then sometimes you're like, all right, don't acutely empty the tank. Whereas like I've learned sometimes with myself, it's like, hey, I want a couple of days off. I homeschool my kids one day a week and I'm home with them all day. That's a complete day off. Some days I can't ride myself because of practice or, doing camps or whatever. So I know those days aren't going to be for me. So instead I do bigger peaks where it's like a couple hard days or a bigger day with some volume, or acutely like, man, I would never write some of the prescriptions that I've done myself for people. But I'm like, how did I just go out and do 41 minutes of VO2 accumulation, even above what my VO2 range would have been? Like I wouldn't have guessed it, but it's like, then you pay for that for a couple days. But as long as you're not trying to get consistent training in over those next days, just like, all right, let it soak in. But if I was thinking like, hey, here's a workout for you, Brennan, and then you got to go back out and do it something the next day, it's like, no, it's not feasible. But I knew like, all right, I know I'm going to have these next few days just to skate it out, let the adaptation soak in and run with it. But those are different scenarios for like self-coached athletes, because everybody gets in the mindset of like, well, this is the plan, but I can't follow it. And that's the art of coaching, right? It's like, making a plan work in somebody's life versus it just being like, this is the best case scenario of what the plan tells me.
I'm curious. I know somebody will ask me, what was the day of 40 minutes of VO2 time? Were you like just going out and smashing rollers? Were you doing actual intervals? What was going on? Because I'm like, oh God, that sounds horrible.
Yeah. So it was one of those improv rides. I do a lot of it where it's like, and I do this with athletes too, instead of like saying like, here's 5x5, like that's easy to prescribe. I call it like putting Tetris together, because in Training Peaks, it looks like blocks, right? let's build Tetris. And that's easy. But to me, it's like the art of coaching, especially for mountain bike and gravel, is well, I guess it's for road too, but it's like never do you see that in a race. Like it's not like, hey, I'm going to hit 5-minute climbs or 2 20-minute climbs or whatever all these like canned workouts are that people write. And that's great. So instead of, it's harder to coach this way, but a lot of times I'll say like, here's that canned workout, but here's the minimum and maximum duration of these efforts we're going to do. And here's your ranges. Like, you know what you're capable of power wise or heart rate wise, but let's string together a fun route that you basically have intervals of this duration. And if you're high on that spectrum of like, say, power, then it's obviously like inverse related. Like the longer the duration, the lower the power, and the higher the power, shorter duration. So for me, this was one of those where it's like, for me, I'm like, if I'm going to do a VO2 workout, it's got to be a minimum of say 3 minutes and a maximum of like 6.5, 7 minutes maybe. And, that's usually if I start out and let the heart rate and cardiac response drift. So to me, it was basically like when I can't hold the power anymore, and I did it on the mountain bike, I was like, when I can't hold the power anymore is when I'll stop. And that was a bad thing to tell myself because the power just kept coming. And I was like, oh no.
It's a good problem to have though.
Yeah, it was great. But I was like, it was one of those things where it's like basically accumulated like probably six to seven intervals between four, and one of them was over 6 minutes long. And I was like, I would have not thought that I would have been able to, cruise out at 350, 400 watts, for those efforts for that many. So
I like that. I think it's interesting. The way I would give that to people is like, go string together 4 to 6 KOMs on your ride. And I want them at VO2 max power, like going hard. Don't do like a threshold, like 15-minute KOM.
Yeah.
And the thing that I've struggled with certain people is that they're always, and maybe this is me not taking a step back and helping them get unattached from the freaking head unit, but it's like, I need a target. And there's those athletes that want this power target. And so I do give 5x5s, and because they're like, this is where I need to go. And they tend, I like doing 5x5 because then it's like, you learn the feeling of like, oh wait, because I don't want to say this in like, I don't know if it's newer cyclists, but like, I think when I first started doing VO2 max stuff, like at 3 minutes, I was like, oh, this is really hard. Like shouldn't be this hard. Nope, that's VO2 max training. And so like giving that parameter, I think maybe you're having me think maybe that's more like for the newer, and I should then graduate it more to this like time and watt range. Because that would then help athletes also get more in tune with, what do I do for 6 minutes? What can I do for 4? Two different, sure, it's only 2 minutes, but it's definitely different power. I like that.
Yeah. And that's like, it's interesting to see that, because like I have the same thing where some people are like so stuck to the numbers. And I think there's a difference of like, say, if they're doing it indoors versus outside, but the response they're looking at. And I'm still on the fence. Like I saw one of your little taglines or the questions of like VO2 max by power or heart rate. And it's like, I kind of triangulate that stuff a lot, because it's like, I've worked in a lab for, doing VO2 max testing and that kind of stuff for years, and did it on my own for a while. And like seeing the numbers, like that's obviously what you're trying to get. So there's, to me, like people throw around the term VO2 max a little bit haphazardly, because it's like, do you really know if you're reaching VO2 max? And sometimes like people think VO2 max training, are you training it to improve your maximal aerobic power, which is the power associated with where you reach VO2 max? And so all these things are like nuances in the terminology and what you're communicating. So to me, it's like, I use it just for specificity. It's like, if you need this type of effort and repeatability to do the races that you're doing, or if, say, I call it stair stepping. If we've already pushed from the bottom, like say by riding a bunch of threshold, and your fractional utilization is a high percentage of VO2 max, then we've got to pull from the top a little bit and basically raise the roof with some VO2 max work and see if we can push that up a little bit. But it's another one of those like soft skills things too, of like maybe not soft skills, but difference than just what the true number is. Like I sometimes like look at the stats of Training Peaks and TSS and all these things, and I'm like, I throw it out the window a lot of times, because like what I'm looking at is more of like, well, do you have a repeatability of your 5-minute power and how many times can you go to that point. And that's why it's like, you know, giving that type of workout is open-ended. It's like, hey, you're fresh. Let's see how many times you can go and dig deep on one of these and really see what you're capable of. Because to me, that is a confidence building workout to know that you can do that and visit that point. But a lot of times I have a hard time giving a specific number because I want them to do like what I call like peak and fade. Because if you're really going for, in my book, if you're going for VO2 max, you want to get the cardiac response elevated as quick as possible and settle there when it's uncomfortable and uncomfortably hard. And then the latter point, like once you're through that dip, that's when you start getting the benefits. And that's like the two things I was talking about of like recommendations for athletes is like, you know, if you're going to do the work, make sure that you're fresh enough to get through the dip, not only acutely within one effort, but also to get an accumulation within that session. Like if you're going to go out and say, do, you know, 5-10 minutes of VO2, does it really benefit you? Say some people maybe if they're still in like the early beginner phases, but you know, as you get more advanced, you need more time accumulation, and that makes a difference. And that's one thing that I've seen with a lot of people is like they think they're fresh enough, just enough to go and do a little bit, saturate their nervous system, give that response of like, hey, this is, I'm getting chased right now, because your body doesn't know any difference between like, you know, primal and, you know, you do an exercise or whatever the stress is, but it's like, oh, I just was stressed. And then, but you didn't accumulate enough to benefit and cause an adaptive signal. So then you're a little tired and you can't do it the next day. And then you just string those together. So instead of that, like make sure that like you bring it down a few days. So then you can actually really hit those sessions hard and get an adaptive signal that works for you.
When you say the peak, I'm getting dippers in my head. You said peak and fade. So do you have people do like hard starts more, or you want them to, or you can explain that?
Yeah. So peak and fade to me, and like I worked underneath like one of my mentors was like Dean Golich, who's coached quite a few people, and like Adam Pulford, and you know, worked with a lot of great people when I was at CTS. And so one of the things is like that peak and fade mentality is basically, I call it peak if you have power, if you train with it, but it's peak the power, peak the cadence, get that high response soon. And then it's more like fight the fade, I guess, because peak and fade is easy to say, but it's basically like, you know, you want to peak it at the start. So then your heart rate gets up relatively quick. And then even if your, like say, power's dropping in my eyes, and you're still above FTP towards the end of those long efforts, as long as your heart rate is climbing, your respiratory response is there. I call it like Darth Vader breathing. As long as you're having all of those subjective feedbacks and your heart rate is still climbing, then you have enough objective power output to produce the cardiac response you need, and you're able to have that respiratory response you need where you're at that above 90% of VO2 max, because there's no point in doing it if you're not doing it at high quality. So that's where it's like the peak and fade is both the power and the cadence, because I find that just being able to spin a really high RPM helps jack that heart rate up, helps keep you the turnover there. And it's very specific, I would say, to when you need that kind of power, because a lot of times it's like closing down a gap or accelerating to make a break or those kinds of things. And you can't just like lollygag and grind around. And there are times that I guess use a lower cadence, but I find that everybody can go to low cadence if they want, but it's harder to have like a bigger bandwidth to say like, here's my cadence range I can work with. And if you have to grind out a hill, like on a 20% mountain bike climb, if you can do 120 RPMs, you can definitely go to low cadence. It's always there. It's always harder to take it to the high end though, is what I found.
Yeah, that's interesting. So my last coach, he was big into the peak and fade, big into the hard starts, and really looked at, basically would say exactly what you just said. And for years, I had been doing like everything by power. So it was way more constant, rarely looked at heart rate, was never really coached by heart rate until recently. So for me, it's like heart rate's like new. And the only thing that I didn't like about peak and fade is sometimes I felt like I was always fading. Like I like learned to never like hold like really high watts for a long time. And so, and I told my coach, I was like, I just feel like I need to do some of these like more classic style things to like just, and I don't know, maybe it's a mental thing. Maybe it was like, that's what gave me confidence. And I don't unconsciously didn't realize that, but Yeah, it's good. I mean, and yeah, it's interesting. Everybody
Well,
has
there's different times to use them. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I don't use peak and fade all the time because I think that's more, it's more costly. Like it's the same thing of like why ride like say 102% of FTP when you can get the same adaptive signal or stimulus at 95%, right? So it's like sometimes it's just because I wanted to produce the best power possible, right? It's like duh. And so that's the problem. So it's like sometimes it's like, and I'm not saying fade, like I just pulled up that 41-minute accumulation ride that I had and I was looking at it, and it's not like peak so much where it's like, you know, if you have somebody that's very, you know, anaerobically or glycolytically gifted, if you give them that prescription and let them run with it, it's like they're going to do like one, maybe 1.5, and they're going to be like shattered because they're so able to peak that it's like, oh yeah, if you go with 1,000 watts and then fade off, then it's going to hurt. So there's like still somewhat of like, hey, the peak may be a little guidance. Like I try to, if somebody has that and they're like, well, what's that mean? And I'm like, just play with it. And some people I can do that. And some people I know like, well, maybe you go 150% and then you taper down into your VO2 range to stabilize. And I'm not looking at like, you know, it's not like a rapid degradation where it's like they're at, you know, they start out at say 150% and they end at 50%. It's more like, hey, you're fading within your range still, but the cardiac output is still climbing. And it's very costly because like that's one of those things of like, but if you know as a racer, and I'm trying to prepare people to race, I want them to know what it feels like to say like jump and try to gap somebody or jump and close down something. So it's almost like some of those, you know, like Neil Henderson workouts or something where it's like the, you know, surge match above power because you got to get a gap, repeat the effort over and over, because when you get there or when you make the selection, you're not just going to be able to sit in and recover. That's not going to happen. Whereas certain times a year I do more steady where it's like maybe we're not getting as much VO2 response, but we're training at that what I call maximal aerobic power. So we'll go to that power, stabilize there, and then the cardiac response is more of a slow return, I guess.
You actually make me think of when the break's starting to form and there's someone who's like, easy, easy. It's like, dude, we're trying to get a break going. There's no easy. Like, you're supposed to be shattering yourself. We're trying to get away from 40 people right now. Like, this is not going to be easy. What are you talking about? Easy. No, that's a good point. And I think that is, like, you've brought up a couple of really important things. I think of confidence. You've got to believe in the plan. I've said that to somebody one time very recent. I was like, I just get the gist that you don't believe in what we're doing. And that's a huge red flag. Like, we're not on the same page. And if you don't, like, I don't have magic to make you faster. And if you're thinking when you go to the start line, like, I don't know if I'm doing the right things, like, we're totally missing the boat, the whatever. And that's super important. And then, just like you said, the real life application of it. I love the data, but like you said before, sometimes you got to throw some of the stuff away. And what is your event going to be? What's happening? Who are you racing? And that's super important for people to hear. I want to pick your brain on strength training. And I know you already did this article with Landry, but everybody hasn't read it. Oh, and actually the question I said before, mindset, give a teaser. What was your article about? And if you can shoot me the link to that article, I'll put it in the show notes so people can go and read that on your blog. What was like the overview of that when you went into that race and just like people refer back to it?
So the mindset was just basically kind of, I mentioned a little bit before, but it's basically that you've done the work and you just got to let it play out instead of like shutting yourself down. Because like that day at, you know, when I went to nationals, it was like, you know, I'd slept in the car. When I drove to Arkansas from Colorado, I rode, you know, a 50-mile IMBA Epic on that next morning with no breakfast. Like rode it that afternoon with my, you know, nephew and my brother, went to the race, rode double days the day before, all that kind of stuff. But it was like, if you count yourself out, you're already out, because one of my kind of phrases that I tell a lot of athletes is like, your body will go where your mind is. So if your mind is saying, no, I can't do this, all that kind of stuff, of course, you're already kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So the premise was like, you have to give yourself the chance to excel. Obviously, like I knew that I'd been riding quite a bit. It was part of my job doing weekly practices. Like I make it happen. And I'd even ran like a studio where I'd done like a Wahoo multi-rider system. But it's like, would I have changed my preparation if I would have thought I was doing it? Probably. But it was like, you know what? I got dropped. If I would have tried to win, I probably would have gotten worse, because I was like, I still put in one of my peak 5-minute efforts in that first part of the race in the circuit, and I still got dropped. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to settle in and ride my race. And I dropped back, started riding my race. And the next thing I know, I started chipping away people. And the thing is, like even, I don't know if you coach many people for like Leadville or those type of events, but like so many people get caught up on the splits and making all these different things that are maybe out of their control. And if they don't make one of them, then what do you do? It's like, you can't just say, I'm going to, produce more power, or I'm going to go faster than I'm capable of. It's basically, you have to kind of like, this is where I'm at. Here's the moment. Be present. What can I do in the now? And that is the kind of the mindset piece, is like doing what you can then. And it's okay, I'm going to focus on taking in the fuel I need. I'm going to focus on, I'm a more skilled rider than a fit rider. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to just have fun. I'm going to rip this trail apart and have fun with it. Next thing I know, it's like the single speed winner was with me, and he caught me from the back. And I was like, huh, he's winning. I'm still in striking distance. And then we rode together for like 90 minutes, like chatting. And he's like, dude, you're talking. Like, you've got some unfinished business up there. Cause I was like, do you mind if I get by? And he's like, you got some work to do. And the next thing I know, it was like, chipping people away. And it came down to like seconds, like past the guy on the last descent. And I think I was the one guy in that race that had a dropper post. And I was like, I know I can descend. I know I'm going to rip this thing. So it's like literally came by the guy, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to take where I know my strengths are and play them. And boom, did it and scored it. And it was like,
Dude,
holy
that's
cow.
so
Like,
crazy.
yeah.
You're
Like,
nuts that you're like chatting away too mid-race. This guy's like, okay, man, you need to go race. That's
yeah.
so wild, dude.
But and then that guy beat me the next year. And you talk about, expectations, because it's like, the jersey and the stars and stripes, recurring number plate. I went back the next year and I was like, oh man, like the pressure's on. I got the returning champ number. Like, it's at a course that I'd won on before, like, even. So I knew, like, hey, I know this course. I won one of my first like $1,000 prize purses at this like Palo Duro marathon in Texas. I was like, I can rip here. But then like the single speed winner moved to my category. Another guy that has like stars and stripes from multiple years of cross and mountain bike was in the category. And I mean, they shredded me that day. Like, it was crazy, but came in second. But it was like still a win for me, because like that's the thing of like, athletes are like, you didn't win. And I'm like, I had a great day. Like, literally, I got dropped so hard because of like, they took off and they had that like, low altitude power, where I'm more of like a, high altitude diesel. And they got through a group on a circuit where literally like they started some older age group in front of us. And I was like, man, I just got totally gapped because we ran into lap traffic on like the circuit through the venue.
Oh, dude.
And so I got gapped, and then it was like a chase all day. And then literally like at the end, I was like by myself suffering the whole day, and then like came up on the second place, and like Jay hopped this awesome rock and rode a line that nobody else did. And then like it was a drag race to the finish, and like held on for like a silver medal. And they were like, but you didn't win. And I was like, but it was still awesome. Like, I had a great day. Like, I pushed myself, and it was more about like the objective, and that kind of all plays into that mindset of like, if you're just looking for that outcome, sometimes you're going to be let down, because there's lots of people looking for that outcome. But if it's like, did I execute on my objectives for that day? Did I still come back and, have a good ride? Did I race my strengths? Did I do all these things? And if you did all that stuff, then it's like, then you're in the good spot, versus just like, well, I didn't reach my outcome goal.
There were like 50 real Instagram reel clips in there. I love body goes where the mind is. I had spoken on a podcast about, if you're a Cat 3, it might take you a little bit to get those upgrade points. Everybody wants it in 1 year, or it's a failure. And, somebody said to me, they're like, I don't get it though. I'm training, I'm not winning. And I'm like, dude, maybe not most, if you're in Cat 4 and 5, it's different. Everyone's not trained when you're like Cat 3 and people are trying to upgrade, most people are training. And Eric Marcotte said in a podcast years ago, oh, you want to be special boy or special girl today? You want to get that W? Guess what? Everybody does. Good luck. Yeah. And it's like just the expectation. Somebody asked me after getting dropped at Capital Region, were you happy with the effort? And I love that. I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad you asked me that. I was super stoked getting top 10. Yeah, it would have been amazing to win. Just the guys that took off. 3 guys shelled us. Curtis White was in my group. Magnus Sheffield's brother, Hakan. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, dude. This other guy, Gino, that everybody knows. And I'm like, man, I'm happy to be with you guys. Who the hell are those guys? It's not like another planet. So, oh man.
Yeah. Are you happy with the effort? That's huge. I mean, it's like, did you do what was, I call it your bubble of control? Like, did you do in the preparation, the day of, all that stuff? Did you execute on what you could control? Because that's the best you can come to the plate with. And like, you can't be upset if you did those things. And like one of the guys that I've coached for over a decade, and like he's a mentor as well as a friend. We've raced together. He always says, always be happy, but you don't have to be content, because it's like, it's kind of one of those things of like, and he's, qualified for Xterra Worlds and Ironman 70.3 after all these like mountain bike stuff. I'm like, dude, you're killing me. I don't want to, like, it's hard enough to be good at one sport, but now you're making me coach you through all 3. And it's like, I was like, all right, he wanted to try it. And then like 5 years after all these Xterra and like off like Ironman events, I'm like, all right, you're killing me with this. Yeah. But
hit me with the strength. I don't want to keep you here all day, but we're gonna have to do another podcast. But strength. So I'm assuming it's a yes, but maybe who yes, who no. But really the biggest question is all year round. If so, what are we doing all year round? Let's just dive in. Where do you take this?
Strength, like my background doing it personally, I think is why I'm resilient as I am now, because like being from Kentucky,
how old
like
are you?
Me?
Yeah.
How old do you think?
No, I'm not playing that game.
I'm 42, or I'll be 42 this year. Yeah.
Okay, sick. All right, I'm 41. Dude, don't come to the road. You're
Yeah. I knew we had to be close. But so growing up, like biking wasn't a big thing in Kentucky, and the people that did were like, we got bottles thrown at us and beer cans and whatever. Like, it's not cool to be riding around in spandex. So there's very few people that came out of my region of Western Kentucky that ride bikes. And so it's like I strength trained a ton, but I think that actually gave me the basis to do what I do now, because like I can take a beating, and it's the numbers that don't show in WKO or Training Peaks and stuff like that. That's like, being able to repeat the effort, have attrition, like go back and just like keep banging in a race effort or things like that. And it's weird because like I'm pretty decent at crit racing, but also I do like ultra mountain bike, which is like, what? 60 minutes versus 4 hours. Like, what are you talking about? Like, but I think that's because like you have to have that snap and that punch to really control the bike and in the crit, and also like the ins and out of momentum changes and the soft skills of mountain biking, where it's like you can't just, the things you see on the power meter aren't truly the kilojoules you worked for that day. Because like there's times whenever, like I raced Enduro Nationals last year and I actually got on the podium and I didn't in XC, but I was like, you're doing these descents and there's no power input hardly, but your heart rate's pinned. And it's like, that's what mountain biking is. There's this stuff that doesn't exist. So for me, I think yes, on strength training, if you can year round, great, especially as you're aging. The more importance that you need to put on that, because the thing that most aging athletes, and I'd say like probably the podcast and things like that, speak mostly to like masters athletes and going up from there, is that you're fighting VO2 max loss every year. You're fighting the fast twitch muscle fibers that you lose. So anything you can do to limit those losses is considered gains, because so many people like somehow we've managed to still stay fast. But I coach a 60-something-year-old masters athlete that has like 6 national championships in all disciplines, like marathon, XC, DH 2-time, enduro 2-time, and it's like very diverse. And that's with him, it's like, hey, we're working on not losing these things versus the gains, because that's hard when you start kind of getting to that bell-shaped curve of like, well, I'm not able to do the same powers I used to. I'm not going to see those numbers ever again, most likely, once you get to a certain point. So then the gains then are basically flatlining. You're just,
what do you think that point is? It's going to be different for everybody, but what do you think the ballpark is?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really say that, because people take care of themselves different. Because to me, I'm kind of a crunchy person when it comes down to like nourishing versus fueling, how well you're taking care of your body, all of these things that are outside of, like, say, I can look at a training plan and be like, oh, this is a workout for a day, but there's like these other 20 to 20 something hours every day that, are outside of our scope of coaches, but that are important because there's so many people that are not taking care of themselves, that are like sleep deprived, eating like junk, all that kind of stuff, but then expecting themselves to perform. And so that's where it's like, strength training, yes, but you have to be in a spot where your body can, soak in the work, just like endurance training. So it's like, you got to have, I would say, to continue that, yes, off season is more frequently, but I've found some routines that I call it like minimum effective dose, or a little bit of like hit the bases, cover the bases that you need, so it doesn't affect your endurance training. And that's the thing, is like, I would rather it be less extravagant, less sexy, that kind of stuff, and just come in, get the job done. Because you can get deep into the weeds of concurrent training and what's the optimal plan and structuring it of progression and all that stuff. But realistically, I try to find like a maintenance routine that somebody can learn, they have proficiency in, they can come back, and then we just manipulate, like, when we're building, I call it a building phase, where they try to push more reps, more weights, that kind of stuff, not overcomplicate them with like, oh, we're in hypertrophy or max power, this and that. It's like, just try to keep it simple. That's another like keep it simple, stupid kind of thing that I always try to keep in mind. And then a maintenance dose that's like, hey, whenever we're in race season, then we're going to lighten up. If you need to, it's called, like, call it greasing the groove. Like, if you don't strength train a bunch and then you, like, say 2 or 3 weeks and you're off, and then you jump back into it, you're going to get sore again. You're going to get that, that DOMS and stuff like that. So I try to keep it enough. And I'm in that phase right now where it's like, oh man, I've had enough work where I haven't been able to strength train in a few weeks. And I'm like dreading getting back in hitting
I'm like, do I go lift some kettlebells tonight? Because it's been probably, let's see here. It's actually good. My last strength session was on, God, dude, the 11th. That's 2 weeks ago. And once I was gone and out of town, it just slipped. And now I'm like, well, I got this race on Saturday. I might go just do some kettlebells. I can do like 100 pounds, but I don't want to go to the gym. And if I even do like squats or deadlifts, and I feel like 3 reps, I would feel the next day, and I just don't want to be sore. But then I have a break from races, so I was going to get back into it there. But
that's funny. Mine was on the 10th, and I'm thinking the same thing.
I'm like, dude.
Yeah, but it's hard when you travel, and that's the thing. It's like, one thing is like just doing something and like limiting your losses, because I did come in and it's like, so many people think if they can't get the full session in, then it's worthless. And I'm like, no, because it's like I commute a ton and anything counts. Like whether it be riding or strength training, it's like, having kids, it's like I end up doing like squats with kids on my back, and they're like, daddy squats. I'm like, all right, let's do daddy squats. And it's like something. So got to get it in there.
I love that.
Yeah.
What's man, this is, I love this podcast. What is maybe some closing words? And we should try and come back on and do one about, I'd love to do more like VO2 Max. I would love to talk about fatigue and fitness. Let me ask you this, actually.
So many you had on there, like the heart rate versus power, like zone 2 high or low.
Well, some people like to come on and just kind of like give their spiel of like what they're, where they go with athletes. And I think that's cool. I think it's like, there's a lot to learn. But once you said that, I was like, because Landry was like, dude, he's going to be a really good guest. And I was like, well, I already know that because I love his answer of like, wait a minute, hold on a second. What are we talking about? And I was like, okay, this is going to be great. Let me ask you personally, are you making gains in numbers? Or are you trying to fend off the losses in numbers?
Personally?
Yeah.
Or with others?
No, you.
To me, it's the process. I mean,
look at you. I can't, let me get some like, because I struggle with this. I'm like, I think if when I was doing it myself too, it's like, all right, I want to hit and the thing that kills me, in 2017, I had a power meter that went funky on me. So I have some numbers that are like just a little bit too high. We're like, wait, was it before the power meter went funky, or were they real? So I've always chased them. I haven't caught them, but I'm wondering when that moment is of when I'm in like preservation mode, as opposed to like, oh, I just hit a new, because I think it was last year I had a new 20-minute best ever and was like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. One time thing, felt awesome, came within 5 watts again. So I knew it was a real number, but now I'm like, when's that going to stop? And I think I'll be in denial for like a season or two. And so I don't know, but
Yeah, see, I think the numbers are like, and like, I feel like you're a little bit more numbers oriented than me because
I like them. Yeah, I can tell that.
like whenever I answered that, I was like, was that real? I was like, yeah, but that's the process. Like I enjoy it because even like from doing all these camps and riding with people, and even like the last few weekends, I've become like a Fondo rider because like I sponsored this event locally here that was like part of the Fondo series, but there was no like official start and finish. There was time segments on it, but you could do as many laps as you wanted, but you didn't have to start at any time. And I was like, I went out and rode it, but I had a blast. Like I rode with people from SRM. I rode with some juniors. We went for some segments. I towed some of the kids. I didn't even have a timing chip and I could care less, but it's like, hey, I got that segment. I know I did, but I didn't even bring my head unit because I was like setting up the venue at 5 a.m. and helping. And I was like, they were like, you didn't even get your SRM data. It doesn't matter. It doesn't count. And I was like, yeah, but I know I got to, almost 10,000 feet of climbing in 70 miles. I was like, it was a great day. I got to chat and then went and rode like another part of a Fondo this last weekend and rode with some buddies that I'd raced with. And same thing. I was like, I'm going to do a coaching experiment where I'm going to ride all low and see if I can keep it below that first ventilatory threshold point and fuel like a champ and try to race state champs tomorrow. And next thing I know, I ride into these buddies and there's like, some people out there that had worn jerseys and like Tour California and stuff like that. Next thing we're doing like 600-watt pulls, doing 50 mile an hour on Colorado descents. And then like an hour of just like pace lining towards the finish. And I was like, yep, not racing tomorrow. I just did a 1200-watt sprint to jump on somebody's wheel. And I'm not a big guy. So I was like, I did that at mile 120 of or a 110 of a 120-mile ride in the mountains at altitude. So it's like all these little things were like, oh, I'm become like a little bit of a Fondo rider the last few weeks.
Dude, I love Fondos, man. People, oh God, I can't even talk about this one Fondo. But yeah, I started doing some Fondos and people are like, you're a bike racer. You're not supposed to be doing Fondos. I'm like, and one guy told me, is there an entry fee? I said, yeah. He says, is there a start line? I said, yep. He says, is there a finish line? I said, sure is. He said, it's a bike race. And it's just different people there. I did a non-timed ride. I was like jonesing to get out, and it was like I'd done one race. I was like, I need to go do something else. It's just gonna be motivating. I went out to Mars Hill, North Carolina. Shout out to the Hot Dog It 100. And Brent Bookwalter had a bunch of KOMs over there. So I had tweeted to him that I will jokingly chase his ghost because I was nowhere near his times, obviously. But it was super fun. I mean, have no idea what the times were. I rode with some guy. We ripped for a while, climbed hard, and like blast of a day. They had good food. It was like, this is great.
I know this is your deal. Like, but how do you go about sometimes like chasing going hard always versus not? Because this is one of the things that was in like that list of things that made me think, and I've come upon it like being at doing some Fondos where it's not a timed race and that kind of stuff.
So the question was, how do I like restrain from going hard and chasing KOMs all the time? Or
no, like you're like the concept of if you do, or like athletes that always want to ride hard or think they have to. And maybe that's a leading question because I was thinking something in my head, but
so I think because of social media now, a lot of people know before I start working with them, I'm like super like endurance, ride a lot of endurance, do a lot of zone 2, come into the season with a ton of base miles, like not a ton of intervals, probably 2 hard rides during the week. And usually if someone, it depends on the athlete too, like if they like doing endurance, then we'll do it midweek because it's like, hey, I've only got an hour. I'm like, cool, let's go bang out these 2 sessions, or maybe it's 1 hard ride and see how you recover from it, and then just go ride long with your friends. Whereas like somebody in Atlanta is like, dude, I got the airport ride and I got this other ride and we're on like go crank this weekend. It's like, okay, well, can you go longer maybe in the beginning of the week and do more endurance? And like, we really can't be going hard all the time. So, and I think then explaining to them, I had a great, oh God, who's this guy's name? I was gonna give him a shout out. He had emailed me and he had said, I always have heard about endurance riding was building a foundation or building a base or building a something. He's like, what's actually happening? And I was like, great question. So I started looking up, like, because I really didn't know the answer. What's going on with the mitochondria? What's going on? So I made this video, why ride endurance? And I'll point people to that, because then it's like, wait, riding endurance will help my hard efforts too. How is that possible? And So I think that just trying to help people understand the big picture better for those athletes that do want to just crush all the time. And, some people come over with like a training plan they bought, and it's like 4 really hard rides during the week. And I'm like, hey man, how do you feel? And they're like, I don't really love this. I'm like, because it's way too much. It's just like, it's not sustainable. And I think, in my last comment on this, I think, most of us, like, I'm super happy that I'm 41 and I'm riding a bike and I'm fit. I'm fitter now than I was when I was 25, because as I was saying, in college, I was like just drinking and partying, and that bled into my life after college. And by the grace of God, someone introduced me to this road bike thing, and shout out to Genesee Valley Cycling Club. A guy dragged me to a training race and I hated it, and they dragged me back, and then I like caught the itch and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I have no idea where my life would be if this did not happen. And so I think it's just the like, hey, are you in this for one of our questions that we finally put down, like the athlete intro was, why do you want to coach and how long do you think you're in this for? Not because we're asking how long do you want to pay us? How long are you actually wanting to, do you think you want to train and ride a bike? Some people are in it for the external external validation. It's like, I want to get this cat 3 and I want to flex on this dude in like, I don't know, 18 months. It's like, okay, cool. Like, that's your thing. Great. But I'm pumped that it's long-term in my life and like just a massive positive thing. So that was too long of an answer, but that's kind of how I look at it.
No, that was good, because the reason that I said that is because like on these fondos and on these things, like people always come to me and they're like, oh, you're fast, I don't want to ride with you. Like, and I'm like, I don't ride fast that much. So, and I guess it's relative too, because like, say, whenever you're fit, it's that much easier. I call it like, it's almost like having a 3-speed shifter versus a 6-speed, high end car. Like, when you have more gears, it's that much easier to have training bandwidth. So it's easier for, like, say, fit guys like us or highly trained to ride endurance, because we can cruise at that pace versus it being challenging. Like, I know when I get fit, I can go ride challenging mountain bike trails and keep it zone 2. And like, otherwise I'm like, oh, I can't go on these trails because I can't keep it chill. And same thing, like, you can't go on probably big climbing rides. But one thing I realized through coaching and actually doing a bunch of like hands-on stuff is the true benefit of actually low zone 2, and that it's resiliency, like doing those long days and you don't have to push them hard. That sometimes it's okay just to chill and ride, because I have so many people that are like, hey, we're going to go on this. I may ride with my wife or my significant other that doesn't ride all the time. And it's not just women and men, but it's like sometimes the women are racers and their like husbands are slower. And they're like, should I charge ahead? I don't want to be I don't want to be a dick kind of deal. But I'm like, just ride whatever pace you need. It doesn't matter. Like, I've done 5-hour rides where my heart rate never got above 100. And I'm like, wow, like, I still got something from that. And some people call it junk miles. And I'm like, no, it just depends. Like, because then that allows you to really, on the big days you need, go to the well and like, say, do the 41 minutes of accumulation. But it's just that in between of like, I think that's what people talk about when they talk about all the data of the polarized training is it's really just having a big gap between of like knowing when you need to be low, knowing when you go big, and having that separation between it.
I think that's a really good point that I've definitely changed my tune on. Like, I was always trying to ride like high zone 2. It's got to be at like 70 to 75%. And shout out to Tom Bell, the guy who coached me from the UK for a year. And he was like, I would love if you rode easier. He's like, you ride so much that ride easier. Do 60% FTP. I'm like, 60%, dude? Really? Like, really? And so what I realized when I was going through and doing some like big base periods of 25, 30-hour weeks, that I can't sustain that all year. I tried, and that's what I kind of rode myself into the ground recently. But, and that was another thing. I started chasing hours. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll do 1,200 hours a year. That'd be freaking nuts. I've never even hit 1,100. I hit 1093 once and like 1080 something. I was like, I'm going to do 1,200. Stupid. Yeah. Didn't have a coach. I can't do that.
Chasing goals for like that don't have
chasing metrics. Horrible.
Perfect. Yeah. It's like, what's the performance outcome, right? It's like, is this going to help me perform better, right?
And so that was the thing. And so then I'm doing these big weeks, and I'm not going to, this is my own fault. I'm not poo-pooing on this other podcast, but there's so many other scientific, super smart people right now that are pushing zone 2, which I'm in agreement with. However, when I was riding too much, I'm like, oh, but even Dr. So-and-so talking about zone 2, this is fine. And I would go out and I would do a KOM, put out good watts. And I knew if I was totally honest with myself, I'm like, dude, there's no way I could repeat that effort right now. It might be a 10-minute effort. I'm like, I blew the doors off. I do not have a repeat of that. I'm like, whatever. I'm like doing zone 2. I'm da, 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 da. And Landry said to me, but when I finally was like, hey man, I need you to coach me and look over this stuff. He's like, I was wondering what the hell you were doing in France, man. You rode like 50 hours in 2 weeks, and like, isn't nationals in a week? I'm like, well, I was maybe going, I wasn't in. And I think the biggest thing that you had said it in one way of knowing when to go high, everyone now is so focused on the low. If you're riding and training for performance, and we don't want to say that word balance, you got to hit those highs at the right time. And that's what I just like defaulted to, these big rides and mega miles, and was like dealing with other stuff off the bike. And it was just going through that period, I know has been so beneficial for me as an athlete, but also as a coach, because it's like, it's great to do the aerobic stuff. Make sure you're looking at your race. The race demands what's coming up, when is it, and like take a look at the full picture. And I just couldn't do that on my own. And so, yeah.
Well, I think there's a difference too, because one of the things you said was like high or low in zone 2.
Yeah.
And I think
true.
there's times for both.
Yes.
Because like, it depends on if you're, you know, say, and what type of an event you're preparing for, because a lot of times people talk about like that polarized training and not being in like, say, zone 2 in the middle, like whenever it's the 3-zone model, or say like tempo, where it's like no man's land. And I'm like, man, that's where gravel racing, ultra mountain bike racing, a lot of that stuff settles into that. So it's like, to me, I use it more of specificity, where it's like, I call them like float intervals, like say endurance float versus threshold float. So it's like, you know, sometimes I say, let's ride some endurance, and then you float your heart rate up. And this is where it kind of gets like quirky, but it's like a lot of coaching that goes into it, of like, you know, push power zones above like say tempo and threshold and even VO2 max. But as your heart rate starts to come up into the top of your zone 2, then dial it down. So then you don't get the subjective, the cardiac response and the extra fatigue, but you're getting more power band. And so a lot of times you'll start shifting power band more into the upper zones while you're still holding mostly aerobic, and then doing the same thing with threshold. And so a lot of times like that no man's land is very necessary. And so even like a lot of the people doing Lifetime Grand Prix and all these big events, it's like you basically have to go out and you have to hold high zone 2, low zone 3 for hours. And it's like, people say like, don't do it. And I'm like, it's costly, but that's what you're going to have to do. And it's specificity. So,
and I think knowing what that feels like, and I think even we always say like consistent pressure on the pedals, like sometimes there's just no break, and I don't know the answer to this. Someone much smarter will. Maybe I feel like there's something to that muscular component. And there was a thing on, and I really shouldn't make this link because I don't know if it's exactly a direct correlation is not the right word, but they were talking on that triathlon show. There's a guy, I don't know if you've ever heard, he's like a pretty smart dude. He has this one scientist on talking about Tabata intervals or classic. I think they were talking like 5x5 VO2 max. And that's why I tuned in. And the guy was saying there was something with the stopping and starting that, like, yeah, the 30-30s are good for that, like that torque and just like getting the bike going again. He said, but when you have those pauses, you're missing out on a benefit of like the kinetic aspect of continually pedaling very hard. And I've kind of like, okay, lower that down to wattage. If you're always doing just easy and never that like, ooh, this kind of stings, and you have to do that for a long time in a race, like you should probably do that every once in a while. And like you said, huge cost. I've overridden tempo myself. But I think there's benefit. I think there's benefit to almost anything. And I have this, like, people think I hate sweet spot. I just hate the over prescription of it. But I think there's a room for everything, as long as it's the right time to your events, to where you are as an athlete. And like, you know,
yeah, it's timing and where it comes in the plan. Like nothing's evil. I use it as like a dimmer switch. Like your body has no clue of like sweet spot or threshold or tempo or endurance or whatever. It's like, it's not like once you go across, like say from, if your endurance range ends at 199 to 200, it's like you don't flip a switch once you go there. It's like all these things are on a continuum. Like you're metabolizing, you know, glucose at one point and fat at another. No, it's like they're all mixed. So it's like, it's just a matter of like, I think I pull a lot of that stuff in there as far as like even alluding to like the sympathetic nervous system and the autonomic stress and that kind of stuff. Like there are things like from the research I've read, it's like once you cross a certain like point and you start doing intensity, that's when your body senses that stress and you can't pull that back. And that's something from like, you know, Dr. Seiler. It's like there's reasons to keep days easy. And, you know, you probably have athletes that are like, oh yeah, I had an easy day. And it's like their average is easy, but it's like you went for a 1 minute KOM or
Hate
something
that.
stupid. Yeah.
Drives
It's
me
like you
nuts.
just wasted that day of it being a low stress day on the whole. Like, so
That frustrates me. This is a good pausing part. But yeah, and it's at like the end of the ride. I'm like, dude, were you sprinting in your driveway? Like, what were you do? Please don't do that. That is an effort. That I don't care if it's not a ton of them, but that is an effort. That was not the point of today.
Yeah. So
Man, this was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thanks, Brendan. That was fun.
We'll have to get up and guys, we'll put the show notes into some of the blogs. What's the best way for people to follow you? Like Instagram, Twitter, blogging, Strava, all those things?
Yeah, I'm kind of active just because like as coaches we have to be, I guess. So it's like Matheny Endurance on Instagram. Most people don't know how to spell my name. So like one of my clients actually took the URL, icoachbadasses.com, and linked it as an alias to my Matheny Endurance website. So it's way easier for most people to remember that. And so it's kind of stuck. But yeah, it's like I try to stay active on there. I'm not that active on Twitter. I do have Matheny Endurance and at Daniel Matheny both there, but mostly just on the gram and on my website. So
everybody give them a follow. If you're listening, give us a good review. Let us know what you thought of the podcast, what else you want us to hear us talk about, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya.